DraftSociety.com presents a Premier League Draft Fantasy Podcast. Welcome to the Key Pass Collective. Your exclusive source for the information, analysis, and advice you need to dominate your fantasy leagues. Come on in. We've been expecting you.
Draft heads, what the heck is going on? Welcome back to the Key Pass Collective. My name is Joe Williams. I will be your host here for this particular episode, and spoiler alert, it's actually just me today. We've had some interesting things go on at Draft Society headquarters, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. But first, a reminder that the Key Pass Collective is the audio companion to the Draft Society website. The Draft Society is where you're going to want to go to get all the tools that are going to help you dominate your Draft Fantasy Premier League. League. That's like saying ATM machine, right? Anyway, so things might get a little bit weird. It's just me here today. Basically what happened is, unfortunately, my good friend and colleague Ryan has come down with the coronavirus. Toddy is coming back from Thailand. It's much better, but still, unfortunately, means that he is incapacitated for the time being. And everyone else had life plans. So here I am. I'll be one-manning this show for you here today, but it's going to be a good one, actually. We're going to have some fun. We are going to talk through weekly preparations. We'll do also, streamers and all those different things that one does in weekly preparation, but we want to actually talk through the process of weekly preparation as well. So I'm going to sort of walk you through my process and just planning for my game week and just sort of making sure that I'm all ready and I'm all set to go. And ideally, we'll get you to that place as well where you feel comfortable going into this game week, hopefully with a determination, at least, or an inkling that you'll be in the running for the win this game week. So that's the plan. Again, the DraftSociety.com is where you're going to head to get many of the tools that we're going to be talking about today, but also just to get some almost anything you can imagine when it comes to dominating this draft game. We will mention a couple of tools, a couple of resources that are available to Inner Circle members. If you're willing to part with a couple of dollars a month, you would also be supporting an independent fantasy football website, and we appreciate you so much. Okay, let's get into it. So, as I sort of alluded to, we're going to be talking about game week preparation, and there's a lot of ways to go about doing that. It especially gets interesting when we are dealing with a situation like we're currently in, which is a double game week followed by a week in which many teams, unfortunately, don't play. So we have a double game week followed by a blank game week where 6 teams, those being Brighton, Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City, West Ham, and Fulham, do not play. So it's going to be very tricky, or at least it's going to take a little bit of planning to make sure that you're not loading up on players this week that are unfortunately going to blank you next week, and you will be up, the creek without a paddle. There's another way of saying that, but I'm going to try to keep it clean this episode. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, so you want to start by looking, obviously, at your current game week. We've got 4 teams with double game weeks: Brentford, Brighton, Southampton, and Crystal Palace. And this is a perfect time to mention that just because a team has a double game week does not always mean that that is a situation you want to go all in on. For example, Crystal Palace this week is playing Manchester City, followed by Brighton. Manchester City, we don't really need to say a whole lot about that matchup, but Brighton, they are on an absolute hot streak. They destroyed the competition last week, and I don't see them cooling off anytime soon, certainly not against the likes of Crystal Palace. So I, personally, am staying well away from definitely defenders, goalkeepers, absolutely. probably forwards, in all honesty, from Crystal Palace. The only players that you might even consider on that team are midfielders who have a decent baseline of what we call ghost points. Now, these are points that players score for doing things other than scoring goals or assisting, because I don't think they're going to be doing too much of that this week. So any players who have a decent baseline of whether it's key passes or dribbles, or if it's clearances, or if it's interceptions, things like that, those might be players worth considering. But honestly, if I'm you, I'm probably staying well away of Palace assets this week. All right, but the first thing I want you to do, just right now, I mean, not if you're driving, but when you get a chance, head over to your matchup and just scope out your opponent's team. This is a good thing to do, especially in a double game week. This is a really good thing to do, just to see how much of your team you are willing to shake up. How much of your team, I mean, especially if you have a good team that's been performing well, are you really willing to drop those players just in order to try to get in double game week players who don't necessarily have any sort of guarantee that they are going to perform like you think they are going to perform? The first thing to do is just double check that, right? So if you head over to your opponent and you notice that your opponent has, 17 players going this week, meaning that many of their players have double game weeks. You look at those matchups and they are juicy. They have, I don't know, maybe it's Ivan Toney in a double. Maybe they have Mohamed Salah against Bournemouth, who doesn't have a double, but it's still juicy. Things like that. You need to first take stock of your opponent's team. How well are you going to stack up to them this week? And if the answer is you're not really, there are worse things than just putting out the best team you can without destroying your team and taking a W, right? Taking one on the chin. But then what I want you to do is, instead of trying to build your squad for this week, instead of trying to build your squad to where you are going to be competing and challenging just for the win this week, what you're going to do instead is turn your focus to 28, which, again, as mentioned, 6 teams are blanking that week. You want to make sure that you are not going to be in a situation where you are a man or 2 men or 3 men down next week. This is huge, right? If this week is not looking good for you, set yourself up for success for next week. Don't just sit on your laurels. One way to do this, if you go to draftsociety.com and you head over to the inner circle on the tab on the top and you pull up our fixture difficulty tracker. We have a fixture difficulty tracker that tracks the matchups for every single team and breaks them down by every position on the field, right? So then you will see, so for example, if I look at Brentford this week, if I look under the defenders section, I can see that defenders who go up against Everton normally score 8.7 fantasy points. That's Fantrack's default scoring, right? They also go up against Southampton, in which defenders normally score 9.4 fantasy points on average. Those are 2 of the juiciest matchups in the entire league, right? That is beautiful. So my point in saying that is, yeah, obviously you can work it to where you're using the fixture difficulty tracker to help you out this week, but you can also use it to help you out in upcoming weeks. And one way to do that is if you go to the top of that page and download the customizable tracker, you can change it so that it displays any game week. So what I would recommend, if you are not, unfortunately, going to be competing or it looks dire for you this week, what you can do is go to that fixture difficulty tracker and change the beginning game week to game week 28. Change that to 28 and end it wherever you want. If it's 29, if it's 30, end it wherever you want after that, or you could just look at 28. And then you can focus on putting in claims or just picking up off of the free agency pool players who are going to perform for you for 28, for 29, for 30. Set yourself up for success. So let's start by looking at your opponent. Let's make sure that you are in the running for this week, that you have a shot. And And if you do, great. Then we'll talk about next steps there. If you don't, you need to start looking forward to weeks upcoming. Let's say, if I go now, I look up. Let's see, game week 28. Let's end on 29B because 29 is another double game week. What I find out when I look at, for example, the defender position, is that, believe it or not, Aston Villa, Forest, Leicester are the top 3 teams in terms of defensive matchups. Villa have Bournemouth, Chelsea, Leicester. Forest have Newcastle, Wolves, Leeds. So it makes for some interesting reading, right? Getting yourself ready for that, because most people this week are not going to be picking up Nottingham Forest defenders or Villa defenders, right? These are all things to just, things to think about and consider if you're not going to be competing this game week. Okay, so now we've decided that we actually are going to be competing this week, right? So for those of you who are not going to just kind of cash this one in and take this weekend off and hopefully go sip a Mai Tai somewhere, for those of us who are going to have the turmoil, the feelings of anxiousness literally all weekend, and just have to go through that whole thing that we put ourselves through every week in this game, let's talk about that. So you can do the same thing with the fixture difficulty tracker, except for in a double game week like this week, it helps it just focus on this week. So if you set the beginning game week to 27 and the ending game week to 27B, which is the second set of matchups, and you sort by various different positions on the pitch, what you're going to notice is that the fixture difficulty tracker on the website, which looks, 4 or 5 game weeks out, it's going to be much different than that. It's going to be much different than the one that you see on the website, because it's only sorting for this week. So what we end up seeing is, unsurprisingly, the aforementioned Brentford fixture list that they have for this week, Everton, Southampton, well, they're going to be at the top when it comes to defenders. Brighton right below them with the double game week against Leeds and Palace. Surprisingly, Southampton does come in third for the defender position, even though they have United and Brentford. But then, Palace, the other double game week team, in terms of their fixture difficulty rating, they are 17th out of 20. So these are the things where you start to kind of take into account how teams previously have scored. Think about Palace in general as a team and how they've been. And then you start to sort of conceptualize, okay, there's double game weeks, but then there's also double game weeks that are traps. And this could be a prime example of that. The interesting thing, when you sort by midfielder instead, where players are not going to be penalized for those goals against, you do see Crystal Palace jump up to that 4th spot. And so even though we're against City, where the matchup is still red, midfielders average 6 points against City. Brighton, again, a red matchup. Midfielders average 7.1. But if you add those together, that 13 is still higher than the next team, which interestingly is Liverpool against Bournemouth, where midfielders average 10.5 against Bournemouth. So something to keep in mind. Again, we mentioned previously about players who have a strong baseline, who get you a floor of points. That would be one to consider for this week for Palace. But the problem being, we don't always know who's going to potentially start both of those matchups. Again, if it's me, I'm steering away. But just something interesting that the fixture difficulty tracker can sort of clear up for you or help you think about in maybe a new way. If we sort by forward, we see Brighton actually jump ahead because forwards score 12.5 on average against Leeds, which is more than either Brentford matchup. So yeah, that's interesting, right? You see the different teams sort of jump ahead in the fixture difficulty rankings just because of, first of all, how many weeks you choose to display, but also their opponents and how many points they give up to each position. So something to think of there. Obviously, this is one of my first stops when I am looking for streamers, when I'm looking to plan my game week. This is where I always begin. Another good spot is heading over to our player projections, which is another Inner Circle benefit. Player projections, we have them every single week, thanks to DraftLad. Amazing resource, and they're constantly being tweaked. We're constantly trying to make them better. We're constantly trying to ensure that they're as accurate as possible. And we do plan to do sort of after this season, we do plan to look back and sort of see how well we did in terms of projections. We're hoping to kind of do, like a little bit of a calculation in terms of their accuracy, in terms of week to week, how close were they to actually projecting a player's points, taking out sort of outliers where maybe a player just absolutely goes off who doesn't normally, a Thomas Partey scores 2 goals or whatever, right? Doesn't normally happen. So we're going to look at that, and we'll obviously post that on the site after this season when we're able to go through and do the post-mortem on that. Anyway, so if we head over to the projections, what you're going to see is not going to surprise you. You're going to see Solly March, Matoma, Tony, Ward-Prowse, McAllister being players who are at the top, the very, very top of the projections this week. And that's because it links directly with the conversation we just had about the fixture difficulty tracker. When you look at sorting by forward, we've got Brighton, Brentford, Southampton. There you go, right? And so it plays out in the projections, which are actually based in past player performances, projection or expectations of player scores, how players previously have scored against that team. So we see all these things sort of coming together to form kind of a coherent narrative or understanding of what is likely to happen this week. Now, there are always freak accidents, and some of us have those happen to us more than others. Looking at you, Ryan. But otherwise, I mean, generally we want to, I don't want to say play it as safe as possible. You want to play for upside, but we generally want to go with what the most, if you want to say the most trustworthy approach might be, the approach with the most efficacy, the one that could be depended on 7 or 8 times out of 10, setting aside, freak performances or freak accidents. And in order to do that, that's where I usually use the projections. If I'm between 2 streamers for that week, I'm usually going to check out the projections and see which one's projected higher. Sometimes it's a gut call, but a lot of times I want to just, go with those numbers, go with what is more likely, the probability says might happen. So now you've spent some time with the fixtures. You've looked a little bit at projections, and you're sort of ready to go and make some either waiver wire claims, or you're ready to just go ahead and pick up some free agents, potentially dropping some players that you have. All of these things will give you a good impression of how your players will do either this week, or adjust the fixture difficulty tracker, and it can tell you, what to expect from your players in coming weeks as well. Again, this is not 100%, but this is going with probability. This is going with past scores. This is going with past player performances. It's built on data. And so our goal, our hope is that more often than not, you'll see these play out to a fairly consistent extent. And with projections, nothing is ever 100%. There's always your Miguel Almiron who is going to score 2 goals on a 0.6 xG, right? So it just, sometimes there are those freak things that happen in this sport. That's of course why we love it and why we obsess. Okay, so the nice thing about using that fixture difficulty tracker is, okay, now you have an understanding of which teams have this matchup that is going to be pretty juicy, should result in a decent number of fantasy points. Okay, well then I go to my platform, whether it's Fantrax or wherever else you play, and I'm going to go ahead and instead of just sorting my player pool by all available players, which can get overwhelming, I actually sort it by team. So if I go to Brentford, I want to see who's available, right? There's some players who maybe aren't going to make my cut, maybe aren't going to make, the sort of that borderline in terms of, do I want to risk it or do I want to pick up somebody who has maybe like a higher upside, right? So a perfect example of that is your Rico Henry. You look at Rico Henry, if we're playing Fantrax default scoring, he's got a 5.08 point per game average. He does decently ghost sometimes. Other games, completely disappears. Completely. Perfect example being the 2-2 draw against Forest, where he scored negative 0.5, played 90 minutes. Right? But generally, what we see is Mr. Henry disappearing against really good teams, or at least better teams. He had the 1 against Tottenham. He had the 0.25 against Arsenal. So, what do we do with this information? There's a decent chance that Brentford keep a clean sheet in one of these matchups. Dare we say 2? Hard to say. But at least 1, right? That being the case, that's guaranteeing you almost 10 points from Henry. If I were to tell you that's all you're going to get this week from a defender, you're probably pretty happy with that. So, this whole mental process later, after I have this in my brain and think to myself all these things, am I picking up Rico Henry? Sure, absolutely. He's probably behind a couple of other players on my list, like maybe a Joel Veltman or maybe a Salisu, right? Someone like that. But absolutely, he's in my queue. He is maybe a few spots down, but he's there because that potential likelihood of a clean sheet with hopefully some ghost points on top. Maybe he even lucks into an assist. Who the hell knows? Probably not, but it's in the realm of possibility. And once you head over to your player pool and you're sorting by various teams to see who's available, because you never know. You don't want to sort by rostered. You don't want to sort by fantasy points scored because you're just going to miss players. You just are. Anytime you sort by those types of things, you're going to miss a guy who hasn't played many minutes but is getting a run in the team recently. You're going to miss a guy who, maybe was injured and is just coming back from injury now. You're going to miss players. So I like to sort by team. You can do the same thing on the player projections page, actually. And don't worry, in a second, I'm going to talk about some other resources you can use if you don't subscribe to a lot of these resources I'm talking about on our website, which is totally fine. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate you going to the site, using the free resources. That's our whole goal, is to just be a resource for you, for the community, for fantasy managers. But if you go to the page and you sort by team instead of who's going to have the most projected points for the week, it will sort alphabetically by team and then sort by who on that team is projected to have the most fantasy points. And if you look on that page, the very last column is stream ? And if there is a 1 in that column, it means that player is pretty lowly rostered, is not rostered very highly, is another way of putting that, I suppose. And that's a player you might be able to target in your league. So using Brighton as an example, right? We scroll down, we look at the aforementioned Veltman, you've got Webster, you've got Dunk, all projected to start both games, all rostered 33% and below in Fantrax leagues, right? And I'm guessing if you use a different platform, this remains true for your league. And all projected above 10 points for the week, right? And these are the type of streamers that you want. These are the type of guys who you're hoping are going to deliver. This is exactly the type of double game week that you really want to prepare for because it is juicy. It's not just, you're not just starting a player because they have a double like these Palace players. Instead, you're starting them because they have a double and good Lord, it's juicy. So you can do that. That's one way to do it, right? And fixture difficulty tracker, you can use ours. There are others that exist online that most people who played, the normal FPL game use. They're not going to be tailored to the Fantrax scoring system, but especially if you don't use default scoring on Fantrax, you can find fixture difficulty trackers that you can use that will be for default scoring on FPL, right? Meaning you're getting points mainly for your attacking returns, for your clean sheets, those kinds of things. Do that, and then do the same thing on your platform. Go and sort by team, scroll through that team, and see which players are available that you might not have been aware of. So that is going to be my first, recommendation, is that you kind of sort, figure out which teams have the best matchups, sort through those, and see if you can't snipe a player who is just sitting on your wire because somebody lost faith in him, and maybe he's not the first name on the team sheet always, or maybe he hasn't played the number of minutes, so people have glossed over him in the player pool, but you went a little bit deeper and you were able to find that player. So start there and put your waiver claims in. Let's talk about a few players that you might want to target this week. All right, for defenders, we'll talk through defenders quick. In terms of streamers for defenders, that leaves us with many of the teams that we have already been talking about thus far, right? So when you sort by defender and you look at the fixture difficulty tracker, you've got Brentford, you've got Brighton, Southampton, Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City, Villa, Newcastle. Tottenham is borderline, with Forest being that sort of like yellowish shade of green. And this is just, purely going based on the pretty shades, green being good and yellow being meh and red being bad. But Nottingham Forest, giving up 7.6 on average to defenders. Now, granted, you shouldn't have any faith in Tottenham keeping clean sheets at this point. So do with that what you will. If you have a Tottenham defender who is going to ghost, then fine. But if not, that's probably that borderline enough where you want to stay away. Newcastle, good luck getting any of those defenders, although they might have been dropped because of the last couple game weeks. So double check that real quick just to make sure. But let's go back up to the top of the list. We look at Brentford. We already mentioned somebody like a Rico Henry. You're probably not getting Pinnock. You're probably not getting me. On the other side, it gets a little murky, but you may want to grab Hickey just in case, although that one to me is a little bit more of a question mark. I'm not sure. I'm banking on that particularly. Moving on to Brighton, we've talked about this already, but you've got Veltman, Webster, Dunk, who are probably available in your league or have only been picked up recently by smart managers. But Estupinian, absolutely, if he's available, pick him up. All of these defenders are starts this week. All of them are definite streams in this double game week. Okay, kind of moving on to those with single game weeks, because it gets a little bit, I don't know, it's more of a gut call, I think, for these ones. When you look at Liverpool playing Bournemouth, there's a chance that Liverpool could absolutely give up a goal, although they've been stout defensively recently. VVD, I'm sure, is rostered. Same with the wingbacks. Here's something to keep in mind. Liverpool are the first matchup of this game week, right? So the Saturday lunchtime game. Do you have a spot on your roster where you have some wiggle room? Do you have a spot on your roster where you're keeping a guy who, you could probably pick him back up if you needed to, or you could pick up a player who would perform similarly? If the answer is yes, then you should absolutely grab any high upside streamers from Liverpool, Kostas Tsimikas being absolutely at the top of that list. I'm not telling you I think he's going to start. I don't. But what if he did against Bournemouth? With the form that Liverpool is in, with Konate and VVD at the back, they've looked absolutely stout in defense. It's always worth a stream if you ever see Tsimikas starting at that left back spot. So that is one tactic too to keep in mind. You want to look at the actual matches for the weekend and see which matches, in early on. I'm talking either the Saturday lunchtime games or the Saturday early evening games where or afternoon games, I suppose, right? But where you have high upside streamers that if they don't start, you could easily drop them and then find someone who's going to do a job for you later on in that game week. So maybe it's the Saturday night match, maybe it's the Sunday matches, right? But if there are players like that, the Tsimikas, those types of players, even arguably, Milner in a start, he's done very well. He's scored the most average points of any Liverpool midfielder this year. That might have changed after last week, but previously that was true. These are guys you want to add. These are guys you want to pick up and hold. And if you're an active manager, as long as your league allows you to make changes up until the whistle, drop them if they don't start. But if they do, you don't have to race to try to get that player. You already have an incredibly high upside streamer. And as mentioned, Liverpool, the fourth strongest team defensively in terms of expected fantasy points this week, with 9.7 being the average that defenders score against Bournemouth. There you are. Okay, moving on. Manchester United, they have Southampton. It's a good matchup, and there's a decent chance that people have dropped United defenders. Decent chance. So I fully expect this team to bounce back. I think Martinez could be a good play this week. Even Varane. Varane is a tough one because he is absolutely dependent on that clean sheet. If you think they keep a clean sheet, if you think that there's a pretty strong chance that James Ward-Prowse does not get a free kick outside of the box in this matchup, then maybe worth a stream. But otherwise, yeah, anyone on the wing, the wing backs or the full backs, I would be interested in. Even maybe a Wan-Bissaka play if he does get the start. I would be interested in, like I said, I'd be interested in Lissandro. Varane is kind of borderline for me. Manchester City playing Crystal Palace. Palace giving up 9.1 to defenders. This is always a gamble. We tell you all the time about City defenders, especially center backs. This is your choice to make, friend. Go and go with God and do what you will. If you choose to gamble on this, then may the fates be with you. Honestly, it's a good matchup. It really is. And City need a strong, convincing win. They've really been lacking recently for form, and this might just be the one where they win 5-0, where they win 4-0. So it's not a bad stream. If you can get a hold of one of the defenders you think is going to start, City, not a bad choice. This is where I would potentially go to Fantasy Football Scout, pardon me, or another website, whichever you prefer. RotoWire, Fantasy Football Pundit does this. Some of the betting sites do this where they give probable lineups. So most people know about Fantasy Football Scout and their team news. We use that as sort of one of the indicators that we use on our projection site to give us an indication as to whether or not a player might start. But I like to go there and just look at their lineups and sort of think through, of this starting lineup, who here is a streamer? who here's a potential streamer? Just thinking in my mind, generally with using my knowledge of my league, who here is probably 40% rostered or less. So, right, when you look this week, you're going to see they think that Pep's going to roll out basically like a 3-4-3 kind of, or more of like a 3-2-2-3. But regardless, Walker, Diaz, and Ake back in defense. Walker and Ake you could probably pick up off the waiver wire, depending on your league. But decent streams this week. Yeah, just know that you are gambling. You are definitely gambling, and you need that clean sheet to be happy about that play. So there you are. Defenders. Let's move right along to the midfield. All right, so we talked through, early matches, I should say, and potentially stashing players from those matches who could be difference makers, who could be high upside streamers. Well, you're going to have a couple of them in the midfield in terms of the early matches for this week. So looking at Liverpool playing against Bournemouth in that early match, and then you have Brighton Leeds and Brentford Everton right in those matches in the following window, which for me is at 10 o'clock a.m., but for the UK is going to be that early afternoon window. So these matchups provide you an interesting opportunity to stash a few players or stash a player who you think might have the highest upside, just to see if that player starts, and if so, slot them in. You don't have to worry about clamoring to the free agent pool to try to get them before your league rival does. Some of these players would include, in his current form, it has to be said, Harvey Elliott. Yeah, I can't explain it either, but he looks lively. He's everywhere. He's in the attack. He's involved. He's been absolutely amazing in the last couple of matches, and truly has been kind of that creative presence that Liverpool were lacking in the midfield. This brings us to other questions like Fabinho and Jordan Henderson. Yeah, I know Jordan Henderson had an assist last week. We also scored 7 goals. That is not going to happen every week. Jordan Henderson is not normally a fantasy option, and I may be proven wrong immediately this week. I know that they're playing Bournemouth, but I am not starting Jordan Henderson. There are better streamers to be had this week. I'm not starting Fabinho. There are better streamers to be had this week. So there's no need to go with somebody with that little upside so early in the game week. You have all weekend to try to find a streamer to slot in who is going to get you some decent points. I just don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth it. So moving on, looking at Brighton, looking at Brentford, most of these players on Brighton are going to be rostered, so it's probably not worth spending too much time looking at that. Caicedo may be available in some leagues. If so, grab him. A bit of a preview into, forwards. If Evan Ferguson is still out there in your league, grab him. But otherwise, yeah, these players are rostered. There's no reason to really hold out much hope that you're going to get, a McAllister or a Matoma, obviously, or a March or a Gross or anybody like that off of waivers. So probably look for greener pastures. As far as Brentford is concerned, surprisingly, there are still midfield assets to be had on the waiver wire. And Jensen and Norgard would be the two that you really want to try to pick up if possible, if they're there. Jensen going to provide you a little bit less upside than a Norgard, but both of them have been solid this year. Both of them have been really dependable, honestly, with a decent baseline of points. Janelt, I'm not convinced, and I'm certainly not convinced that he's going to start both. One player to look out for, potentially, just depending on whether or not he gets the start, would be Mikel Damsgaard. Damsgaard has looked fantastic in, we could say, almost every start he's gotten, which have been very, very few. But this could be the time. One of those high upside streamers to potentially stash. Remember, you can drop him. Aside from that, we have a couple of shouts for players who maybe are lesser known, or just kind of coming onto the scene or getting a shot maybe for the first time. Kamaldeen Sulemana has been tearing it up for a couple weeks now. I mean, I guess that's put that in retrospect, but sort of tearing it up. But he does have that double and is likely to start both of them and is still only rostered in 18% of leagues. I assume that's changed probably by the time you listen to this, but he's probably still out there in your league or potentially is available, especially in home leagues if you're not in an uber competitive league. So Sulemana, definitely check to see if he's there. Another interesting name, Ainsley Maitland-Niles. Mainsley, as we call him here on the pod, 3% rostered. At least he was at the time of the projections being published. He is likely to get a start, and it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. He's a midfielder, but would probably be starting at that fullback position. And so he's not going to get penalized for goals given up, but he will be able to whip in crosses. He will be able to potentially get interceptions for you, those kind of counting stats. He's a decent one to just grab. I mean, especially if you find yourself in a spot later on in the game week, or you find yourself in a spot where, you know, one of your players who you were counting on is benched. Looking at you, Pep. Looking at you, Klopp, depending on who you have, right? So, yeah, he's one to just pick up and just, you never know. You never know. Another player from Southampton, Carlos Alcaraz, who has shown definitely in his brief cameos, one to consider. His health is a question mark, so keep your ears perked for that one. But he has looked absolutely lively in his cameos. Check that out, because that would be one to potentially add on this double. Even if he does get one start and then, let's say, 30 minutes in the second one, that's a good amount of minutes on a double game week for somebody who is averaging 10.6 ghost points per start. So that's pretty incredible. Sorry, those are projected ghost points. My fault. That's not per start. Just want to make that clear. All right, cool. Moving on. Okay. Other players to potentially consider would be the aforementioned Harvey Elliott. Like I said, Sabitzer potentially against Southampton. He's still less than 50% rostered, which I find pretty interesting. And yeah, I mean, aside from that, that's a lot of these players, unfortunately, you know, even though we label them as streamers, I know that in a lot of these uber competitive leagues, I mean, these guys are already rostered. You need a deep one. You could potentially roster or pick up Kevin Schade from Brentford, who might get one of the starts. And again, Everton, Southampton, and that would be massive upside for the midfielder position. At least that's his default. That's his default position, even though he will be playing basically as a forward. So that's a deep shout. I know that some of you kind of complain sometimes because it's like, well, all the guys you guys mentioned are already rostered in all of my leagues. So hopefully that one is out there and he's kind of sleeping, or people are sleeping on him, I should say. All right, let's move it right along to forwards. I mentioned Evan Ferguson. He's now, I think, up to 60% rostered. I don't expect him to be out there in your leagues, but the sort of converse of that is going to be Danny Welbeck. Does Welbs get himself a start and split the two games with Ferguson? If so, do you start both? I think I would. The problem is, if Welbs doesn't start the first one, would I start him? I don't think so. Oh, that's a tough one. It depends on your options at forward. Would I rather start Danny Welbeck or Paul Onuachu, another potential streamer who has Man United and Brentford and has been benched the last couple of weeks? I would rather start Welbeck in that case. Would I rather start Welbeck or Yohan Wissa? This is the level that we're kind of talking about, right? Yohan Wissa also might only start a match, but he might start both. Incredibly goal dependent. Welbeck is lively when he plays and he's fit. He's been great this year, honestly. I think I'd go Welbs there. So, again, it's not always just because it's a double, you start the guy. You have to take into account, will they be rotated? Who is their backup? How good is that person? Are they in the manager's good graces? And if all those things are a yes, then you really need to think about who you start on a double, because starting a Yohan Wissa in that first match against Everton sounds great. If he gets yanked at 70 and then doesn't start the second one, Brentford, cruise to an easy win against Southampton, maybe he doesn't see another minute. And you can see that scenario playing out, right? I mean, that's not hard to imagine. So, these are all potential streamers, and I know they sound gross. Why? Because the forward pool is disgusting right now. So just things to keep in mind. Another one, Reiss Nelson. Yeah, Reiss Nelson. I mean, after the heroics, after the incredible scenes from last match, yeah, he might actually get that start. We need to check in on Trossard's fitness levels, but Reiss Nelson is one of those that you probably want to add sooner than later. And know that, yes, you are waiting until Sunday at 10 a.m. Or Sunday in the early afternoon matches to figure out whether or not he's playing. But you have Newcastle Wolves in the match on Sunday evening. And that's the last match. Oof. I don't know, guys. I don't know. I'm not doing it unless I have other options. I know there's a lot of upside there. There's a lot of potential. We even have him, let's see. We even have him projected for like 10 points, 12 points. 10.9 to be specific, but yeah, I don't know. That's a hard one. Like I said, forward pool sucks, which is why I'll say, if this man, Manor Solomon, is available, please add him over any of the players that we've mentioned so far. This man is absolutely electric. My hair stands on end just from watching him play. He's incredible. I love the man. I love the player. He's incredible, and I think his time has come. I think he really is about to start getting more extended runs in the team, and I'm here for it. I would love to add him anywhere I can, even just as a speculative add. If you have a bench spot that you can afford to not potentially start him this week, because again, he is that later match, he's one to stash and put away for the future. Dango Ouattara, always out there. 36% now. He's slowly creeping up in ownership percentages, or rosterhood, I'd like to call it. But is playing Liverpool. Probably not going to find a ton of joy there unless he gets in behind, which is possible against Liverpool. Does ghost decently. Yeah, if you're in a rough spot, if you're in a pickle, sure. But otherwise, I'm probably avoiding him this week. Another one would be Jorginho Ruter. This would be probably the last forward that I want to highlight for you all. But Jorginho Ruter, Leeds forward, 10% rostered at the time of publishing the projections. In line for a start. There's a lot of injuries going on there. Plus, Ruter is in form. He's looking good. He does ghost decently, we could say. I mean, he's okay. You're hoping for a goal, obviously. Is up against Brighton, who are stout defensively. So again, forward pool, gross. So all of these are going to be kind of dart throws, right? But yeah, there's upside, obviously, to all of them. It's kind of up to you to figure out which one you believe in most. Hope that helps. Okay, friends, I'm going to leave it there because I know it's probably been a lot just to hear me and me only. If you've made it this far, man, do I appreciate you this week more than ever. But honestly, yeah, like I said previously, community, I hope this helps because you guys are the reason why we started this whole project. You're the reason why we have all these resources available, why we try to be creative in the offerings that we put out on the website. And if we can ever do anything better or help to create resources that would better prepare you, if you have ideas for articles or ideas for stat columns that we can do, anything like that, deep dives on anything, please get at us and let us know. We want to improve. We want to continue to offer the absolute best product that we can and website that we can. So we appreciate the support. There's a ton of free stuff on the website. Go over and check it out. Whether it's rankings, whether it is looking at articles, we have waiver wire articles, we have sleepers articles that are free every week. Check those out. And then there also is the subscriber benefits. But again, if not, then there's plenty of free stuff out there. You can check out lineups from FF Scout. There's ways that even if things are tight, if the budget's tight, there's ways that you can still win at this game. And as a last resort, you always can tag us on Twitter, ask us a question. There's a chance, I guess, that your league mates will see it. But hey, why not? Give it a shot. Create a burner account. Ask us something anonymously. We'll retweet it. We'll get some more eyes on it and see if this community can't weigh in. There's a lot of amazing minds in the community, and we'll get as many eyes on it as we possibly can. So tag us on Twitter. Tag me. Tag the Draft Society. Tag Ryan at CNFC82. Tag Toddy at Toddy Andor. And hopefully they will be back with me next week once we all sort our ridiculous, crazy lives out. All right, friends. Have an amazing double game week. I hope it's not too infuriating, as many double game weeks can be, but just know that we're right there with you, cursing things, ruining things, and hoping that we have just the luck that we need to pull it out. All right, it's been a good one. Thanks, community. You guys are the best. Talk to everyone soon. KPC out. Cheers.